We're looking for meaning, we're longing for light, we're aimlessly dreaming somewhere out in the night. We look at each other and we wonder who's right. Now pushing out our opinions, our gift wrapped in pride. Feel the waves rising all around us, but tell me, where can we anchor the sorrow? If we look to the heavens, my brother, one day we'll discover we're closer to truth than we know.
Joseph Smith has done something incredible with the Book of Abraham. Recently there have been videos put forth proffering a view given by one man of the proper extrapolation of the papyrus purchased by Joseph Smith. There's an odd double standard that comes from presentations as we see promulgated by the likes of YouTubey Aaron Shaft 2006, and trying to give the illusion of having discredited one of Joseph Smith's claims, when the only opposition they can offer is another man's extrapolations.
But you'll notice that parts of the papyrus were torn. He did not have the full picture here. So what Joseph Smith does is he ad-libs. He fills in the torn parts. So he puts the head of a human here, and he puts the torso of this person laying down with his hands facing up. And then he proceeds to give an explanation as to what these things mean. And there's what he says. He said that this represents the idolatrous priest, Elkanah, who stands ready to sacrifice Abraham, the patriarch Abraham, from which the book gets its name. The bird on the right, he says, number one, is supposed. The problem, of course, is he gets it all wrong. Gets it absolutely wrong. The problem, of course, is he gets it all wrong. Gets it absolutely wrong.
And the question is, can they back it up?
Wrong. First of all, this is the facsimile as explained by Egyptologist Richard Parker. Now, this is a guy who does know what he's talking about.
Notice what this really is. Mr. Richard Parker didn't find some facsimile like this. This is only an illustration of Mr. Parker's own ad-libbing. Now, isn't this interesting? Mr. Parker, though an Egyptologist who specialized in roughly the same time period of the breathing text, is not a man focused on religious texts. So we are to take the word of one man's ad-libbing and not another, simply because Dr. Parker has a PhD and has studied some aspects of Egyptian history in this era through ancient manuscripts. And they're taking his view of this as if it's some scientifically certifiable and irrefutable truth. Never mind the fact that the man was focused on the math, science, and astronomy of the time period rather than religious texts. Yet we are to take this one man's extrapolations as utterly overthrowing Joseph Smith's prophetic claims by simply fabricating an extrapolation of his own. Let us move on to what is actually on the texts and the relation to Joseph Smith and the religion he brought forth, the LDS or Mormon faith. The Book of Breathings, another name for the papyrus upon which the Facsimilie I is found, has some interesting writings, especially when viewed in context of the theology Joseph Smith taught, namely the concept of overcoming death and returning to life. Not just a return to life, but a progression to a better one, even to the point of entering a life and state of divinity. Here's one interesting plea, taken from the very text of the very same papyrus that Joseph Smith owned and took Facsimilie I from. In reference to itself, the text exclaims, "Do not let any man read it." What an interesting request. If something is so beneficial to the information it provides, why the secrecy? If this is just a text about mummification, why the secrecy? Why do people keep things to themselves when those things are believed by them to be good and beneficial? Perhaps they are trying to keep them sacred. Now, before going much further, I'm going to recommend a book to you, a book from which I'm about to read. It's titled The Message of the Joseph Smith Papyri, an Egyptian Endowment. This book, brought to us by the late Hugh Nibley. This is actually a second edition of his work. It's been more refined. The citations have been gone to. I would highly recommend it. Back here is the Facsimilie I in that book I just commented on. Now, our friends here would have us believe that this has to be Anubis. There has to be a jackalhead there. The funniest part I found is in their extrapolations. You'll notice the gray area is all where the papyrus existed. But in their extrapolations, they took the liberty of changing something within the gray area. If you'll go back and look at theirs, there's a little dovetail that's not apparent in the actual manuscript. Excuse me. But they took the liberty to put a jackal's little horned tail, devilish looking tail, on the bottom of Anubis. I'm wondering for that, if they just felt taking liberties was okay in the places where you didn't have stuff, so they thought they would extend it into the places where the stuff was already defined. But anyway, now to the crux of the matter. If all of those writings next to the papyrus that went on, as you'll recall, to the left, primarily started at the right, so that this figure was pretty much to the far right, and then all of the other figures would be to the left. If they were all dealing with obtaining immortality and going on to the next life, and several references to being justified and being made pure and entering in with the gods and receiving divinity, what does all that have to do with Abraham getting stabbed, or being almost stabbed and sacrificed? What compelling evidence is there that this pictograph would be included with those writings? And why wouldn't this pictograph simply be some mummification or some connection to the mysteries of Osiris, as Mr. Parker claims? Now, the section I will be pulling from in this book is the commentary, part 5, The Long Road Back. Here's the meat. This is where facsimiles 1 and 3 of the Book of Abraham, depicting the king, or his substitute, in his fallen and his risen state, respectively, come in. Facsimile 1 furnished the frontispiece to the Joseph Smith Book of Breathings, on the one hand, and on the other, teams with the sacrificial Abraham motifs. Need we recall that Bruno Stryker, in winding up his Book of Breathings studies, cites Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, which we have shown to be a repetition of his own experience on the altar, as illustrative of the main idea behind the rites of the Breathings texts. Right there. See that? Need we recall that Bruno Stryker, in winding up his Book of Breathing studies, cites Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, tied to the experience that Abraham had at the altar, as illustrative of the main idea behind the rites of the Breathings text. Wow. And that was a non-Mormon that said that. That picture of the man on the lime couch, found at important shrines in Egypt, quote, represents how the king is resuscitated from his torpor. This scene, says Frankfurt, represents, therefore, the greatest mystery of the Egyptian beliefs, and this may explain why the accompanying texts are protected from the profane by particularly enigmatic writing. As in the 40-day literature of the early Christians, the greatest mysteries are the ones least exposed